Good afternoon, everybody. It's your eye expert, Dr. K. And today I thought I'd just show a case of a toric multifocal lens. Uh, Here we are just getting the eye prepared, getting some viscoelastic on the surface to minimize really drying. The toric marks have already been created. I make those pre-operatively at the slit lamp with a weighted toric marker. I just use kind of indent on the cornea, then I use a marker after the patient's been draped to kind of highlight the indentations, and then usually we'll confirm with aura. Getting appropriate toric alignment is super important. So we make the side port, we inject with preservative-free lidocaine, mix 50-50 with BSS, and then get a good fill of viscoelastic, 5mm corneal marker there centrally, and then we'll make our 2mm or 2.4mm side port incision. Thornton ring with the spikes up, and then gently place the blade to get a nice square incision with no chevron. We use Utrata and a 0.12 to initiate and complete the Capsulorhexis. I use that corneal marker to try and get appropriate sizing of the Capsulorhexis, and in this case it actually looks fairly centered, and so we can use it to get centration as well. Usually going outside that marker is a little okay. You won't be outside of the optic, and there'll be good overlap, but you don't want to get too far outside that marker. And we'll complete the Capsulorhexis, make sure it's nice and round, finishing outside where we started. Then we use some BSS and do hydrodelineation and hydrodissection. Hydrodissection first, there's a good fluid wave, push it down, other side, and then you'll be able to rotate the lens. There we go. And then once the lens rotates freely, then we'll do our hydrodelineation. And hydrodelineation will give us a free nucleus, and we remove that first, and then get out our epinucleus and cortex. Reinflate with viscoelastic just to protect that cornea, and then we check our flow. And I don't have a very aggressive phaco tip. Check the flow, start in quadrant mover mode, evacuate any central viscoelastic, and then begin our sculpting. Sculpt, a groove depth to 1 to 3 depths, I would say, to get the appropriate central groove, and then we'll crack with our second instrument, rotate and chop. And usually I'll do a horizontal chop, sometimes vertical if it's a dense lens. I bring the piece centrally, usually try and keep it still in the bag, although sometimes it is out of the bag depending on the size of the fragment. I just kind of work there. The piece and then the heminucleus that's remaining at this point are keeping the bag back, although my second instrument is in a good position behind the piece, keeping any. I'm kind of being careful of any surge. We'll break up that heminucleus. It does help to manipulate the phaco tip a little bit, give it kind of a little jiggle. That will help get some of the pieces emulsified more quickly. Now that the nucleus is out, we will get our epinucleus, same thing, jiggle the handpiece. That will allow the epinucleus to come. And now all that remains is the cortical material. And we will use IA to get that out. Usually I try and go in a circumferential motion, check the flow, and then get any big pieces out. I don't really have too much of a problem leaving some soft nuclear pieces in the AC that can be taken out with the IA. That doesn't bother me at all. There's another one. Then we do our circumferential removal of cortical material. That comes pretty easily. Just kind of work our way around with whatever looks like it's going to come nicely. get any strands. I like to remove all the strands in the posterior of the capsule. To minimize inflammation, get the capsule as clean as possible, minimize any PCO that there may be. I think that helps. Now we will power wash with some PSS, make sure all the pieces of cortical material have been removed. I also feel like this really gets into the fornix of the capsular bag. Even though this is good dilation, sometimes there's residual lens material that is retained in the capsular fornix, and so the BSS does help to liberate that. Now we will fill with ProVisc, and what we're going to do is measure with aura. So we want to get an appropriate fill with aura. We're going to wash off all of our viscoelastic that's on the surface and measure our pressure. That's pretty good. Then we'll turn our lights out and get our initial aura measurement. So the lights will go out here for a minute or two. I don't have the aura overlay, unfortunately. We're having the patient look at the blinking red light, and we will get a couple of measurements. Now the aura will measure in this aphakic mode what the appropriate lens power should be, and it will also give you a measurement of astigmatism. And so you can use that along with your pre-op measurements to decide what the appropriate lens power is. We will use a Singer sweep to remove any anterior capsular lens cells. Then we'll put the lens in, we'll get it appropriately positioned, remove the remaining viscoelastic, and remeasure. I do find that the aura is very helpful for toric alignment. It doesn't work 100% of the time, but when it does work, you can really get that toric lens aligned perfectly. I usually will go with my preoperative measurements for the IOL spherical power, and also oftentimes for the toric power. It's a T3, 4, what have you. But in terms of axis location, I always start where I made my marks because I know that those are close to right on, just based on my experience with my preoperative markings. They're consistent. Then I use the aura to really refine it. So that might even mean nudging the lens 5 degrees one way or the other. If I'm moving it, 10 degrees or more, then I really have to question the aura measurements. But typically in the phakic mode after toric implant, the aura measurements are pretty good. You do have to be careful to make sure that there's no external pressure on the eye and things of that nature. But it does help to get that toric aligned appropriately. And again, it's usually fairly close to my preoperative markings within 5 degrees or so. So we'll get all of our viscoelastic out. You do want to make sure that you get all the viscoelastic out where the haptics are going to sit. Why? Because you don't want the lens rotating. So we'll get that lens in position. I do usually use kind of a BSS to help rotate the lens, just shots of BSS to help move that lens a little bit back and forth and around to get it right where we want it to be. Then once it's lined up with those preoperative markings, then we'll rehydrate and we'll remeasure with the aura. In this case, it takes a little maneuvering, but everything is nicely centered. Kind of over-rotated there. That's looking pretty good right there. You want to be careful not to overhydrate the incisions. That's a fair amount of hydration that we've got right there. We will try and get our lens centered, and we'll have the patient look at the 2 little lights so that the central ring of the multifocal is also centered. If there are bubbles in the AC, that's usually okay as long as they're small. It doesn't typically seem to bother the aura measurements. And so what we'll do is we'll check our pressure again. I may or may not use the automated tonometer, the manual tonometer, I should say. And we'll turn the lights out and we will remeasure. And that's pretty well lined up with the 2 marks I made. If it's not directly in line, then it has to be parallel. because it's always possible that your marks weren't centered on the visual axis. And so let's see, it looks like that's pretty good. We're going to rehydrate. We'll check our pressure here. We also need to inject some moxie, and then we'll be on our way. That looks great. And there you go. IOL is in place, nicely lined up. It's a good centered multifocal, and this patient should be very satisfied. Thanks, everybody.